Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks to the Dean's Office, you, Margie, and others, Nancy, who have worked very hard to get this all together. I also appreciate the opportunity to provide some of some information on what I'm up to and why this is so exciting, at least from my perspective. Basically, I just want to give you an overview first about how to place my research in the overall context of both what I've done in the past and where some of this work is going. In essence, basically what I've been spending the last more than 10 years or so has been to understand the effect of governance, good and bad, on financial reporting quality. And more specifically on audit quality, but it's essentially asking the general question of, does good governance really, what impact does good or bad governance have on the quality of financial reports that go to the capital markets? And this is sort of my view of how some of the stakeholders in the governance mosaic, as we call it in one of the papers that Arnie Wright, Jeff Cohen, and I did. Sort of laying out the major stakeholders and to give you a sense of where most of my prior work, as well as the work that I will be talking about in a moment, it's largely focused on the role of the audit committees and auditors, both internal and external, on how they affect not only the financial reporting quality in general, but more specifically through providing better assurance on the financial information that hits the capital markets. And importantly, it's the interaction among the stakeholders that become very important, and that I think is a very difficult piece, but an important piece to address. So, for example, how do audit committees really interact with external auditors to be able to collectively provide higher quality financial reports to the markets? I'm going to focus on two, what I believe are very contemporary important issues, and I have two projects in these areas. And those are essentially talking about social and professional impact of social and professional networks on financial reporting quality, and also enterprise risk management, and how does that play into financial reporting and the quality associated with it. Let me start with the first one. For those who are sort of unfamiliar with what audit committees do, essentially audit committees are subcommittees of the board. And they are essentially charged with oversight over the financial reporting process. So if you're talking about large companies, or any public company for that matter, you've got the management, which is charged with the responsibility of putting the financial statements together. They are basically their assertions. The financial statements are assertions of representations of the management. And then you have the auditors, external auditors, providing assurance on the quality of those financial reports. And audit committees of the board, which are subcommittees of the board, are essentially providing oversight over the entire process. But the whole idea being that they, being representatives of the stockholders, are essentially going to be providing some level of monitoring on this whole process. Now, the roles and responsibilities of the audit committee have been expanded quite a bit in the last decade or so, especially since the passage of SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And a lot of research has really documented the effects of new regulations, new rules in place, and we know a lot more about how the audit committees, what does it take to be an effective audit committee with respect to financial oversight. One of the things that's actually a requirement now is, for the most part, public companies need to have these audit committees staffed with entirely independent board members. Okay. In other words, the idea is that the members of the board who serve on these committees are not in any way materially associated with either the management or the firm, because there should not be either a real or an appearance of a conflict of interest. Now, as you might expect, these board members members do tend to have some type of ties. Often, some of these ties may be social. For example, the CEO of a company and the member of the audit committee belong to the same country club, or have gone to school together. Or they could have professional ties. They serve on the same board of another company. Now, it turns out that the definition of independence, you could, in other words, perfectly comply with the regulations, the regulational definition of independence. So for instance, an extreme example is my neighbor who works in a bank, actually, and with whom my kids go to school. I see him every weekend. If I had him serve on my company, if I'm the CEO, he would probably perfectly qualify as an independent board member and an audit committee member. But the question really is, how independent and objective will this person be in substance when they come up? And are they going to have the spine to be able to ask the tough questions that need to be asked? And that's the real essence of whether a person who is independent in form is also independent in substance. And that's where some of this research now is going. And there's already some evidence that some of these social ties actually, when you have audit committees with social ties to the CEO, they are associated with lower financial reporting quality. So there's some evidence that's coming in. In other words, it's essentially trying to demonstrate that the distinction between independence in form and in substance. Now, interesting thing is, some of these ties can also be functional. So for example, I mean, if you have a professional tie because you worked with somebody in another company, it's very possible that makes the working relationship better. It enhances the working relationship between the audit committee member and people in the firm. So there are some functional aspects to it that need to be explored further. So right now, I would characterize this entire area of research as relatively in its infancy in terms of the. So one of the issues that we've been working on is really the impact on investors. Okay? Because currently, there is very little consistency in terms of the type of information that's provided by the SEC in the regulatory filings with respect to professional ties, and actually more importantly, there's almost nothing with respect to the existence of social ties. So the question is, if you told investors or potential investors that such ties exist, will they make different decisions, investment decisions? And that becomes a very critical question in our minds. So basically that's the question we are asking is, does knowledge of ties between the senior management and members of the audit committee impact investors' judgments, either with respect to their assessments about the effectiveness of the audit committee, credibility of financial reporting, or for that matter, investment decisions? And in this particular thing, I mean, the behavioral experiment, which is really what we use here, I think is well suited for this because we don't have archival data with respect to social ties at this point. So there is no way to test, to really do this when there is no, so the policy implications are going to have to be derived from ways other than using data archivally, which is SEC data or other kind of proxy data. So that's what I think is very interesting. And right now we have preliminary results which are very, very exciting. And we are clearly seeing that investors are reacting quite significantly, and unfortunately, or as expected, negatively to the presence of social ties. So if you tell them that there is these ties that exist, their investment decisions are significantly lower. Their willingness to invest in firms. So it has a lot of public policy implications, among other things. Another project that we're currently involved in relates to this whole area of enterprise risk management and its relationship to financial reporting quality. We know about all these risk management failures and Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns. More recently, actually, it's been the London whale disaster and JP Morgan Chase has been in the news. So it's not new that financial reporting risk is a very important component of ERM. What we really know know a whole lot less about is how do other components of ERM play into financial reporting quality? Meaning, how does an auditor consider other aspects of, for example, strategic risk or operational risk? How does that really play into the audit process? How do CFOs think about risks beyond financial reporting? How does strategic risk come into the thinking of how CFOs structure their thinking and thought process as it relates to the quality of financial reports that are generated? It turns out there's very little we know about this. Even though ERM is very much in front and center, we appear to know a whole lot less about how it impacts financial reporting quality. And so that's where actually this is a piece of another project that we are currently doing, which is much more exploratory. So we basically had access to the audit committee chair, the CFO, and the external audit engagement partner of firms, of 10 public companies. And we call them triads, so basically 10 triads. And the idea there is to get to some of these basic questions about, we don't even know if they have the same view of ERM, if there is consistency across. In other words, there could be an audit committee member of a company, a CFO, an engagement partner.
Minutes, by the way.
I'm sorry?
12 minutes.
2 more minutes?
No, you're at 12 minutes.
Oh, 12? Oh, okay. So, some of the important, I'll wrap it up in a minute. So a number of issues become very important in terms of trying to understand to what extent, or what's really the connect there, because so much of these resources are being poured into ERM, and ultimately a component of that as it affects the capital markets should be this link through financial reporting quality. I think I'm going to conclude by this. I think there are some really interesting interdisciplinary opportunities here. For example, in the corporate governance area, particularly in the accounting area, and I think to a large extent in finance as well, much has been, a lot of emphasis has been on monitoring the role of the board and the audit committees. In other words, you've got to look, you've got to make sure that the management is not robbing the stockholders blind. But there is a whole different role of the board in terms of being able to advise the managers, the management, work with them. And there are people in the strategy area who are looking at it. There's very little that we know in terms of how that applies in the financial reporting work. And my colleagues and I have done some work in that area, but I think a lot more can be done, particularly in collaboration with people who have some expertise in strategy. Another area is governance leadership, which is another thing that I'm out of time, so I should stop.